When did the Revolutionary War start? Was it the night of Paul Revere's ride on the 18th of April in 1775, made famous by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow? Was it the next day at the Battle of Lexington and Concord? The shot heard around the world is a famous line from Ralph Waldo Emerson's poem, Concord Hymn. Of course, later it was animated for Schoolhouse Rock, and that's how I found out about it. The folks in New Hampshire have their own take on when the Revolution started. For you see, on the night of April 14th, 1772, the Great Pine Tree Riot took place. It was an event not immortalized by a famous poet, but led to the eventual independence for millions of people. I didn't know about the Pine Tree Riot until I moved to the Granite State. In school, I had learned about the Intolerable Acts. The King of England had imposed upon the colonists taxation without representation. The Stamp Act was one of them. It was a tax on various forms of printed paper. The Stamp Act was felt in the densely populated areas like Boston, where the news was printed on the paper that was then taxed. But in the rural areas, the colonists could go for months without ever seeing any printed news. Places like Ware, New Hampshire, that's the name of the town. Ware, like who's on post, W-E-A-R-E, Ware. King George III included a pine tree law when he granted the town charter in 1764. It stated that the largest pines to be reserved for the Royal Navy so they could use them for masts for their ships. Any tree standing 150 feet to 240 feet and 24 inches wide were marked with a symbol called the King's Broad Arrow. The wider the tree, the higher the fine, and if you didn't pay the fine, you faced prison. A wealthy merchant named Ebenezer Mudgett and his wife Marion settled in Ware in 1765. By 1772, they had 8 children. That's a lot of kids. I only had 6. Author Connie Evans wrote, "The settlers in Ware were protected from enforcement of the Pine Tree Law due to the density of the forests and the distance between Ware and the seacoast town of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where the governor lived. But as the old Indian trails widened and travel increased, so did the ease of getting to those remote villages and towns where the white pine trees could be found." The Stamp Act may not have been a big issue for the people in the small villages, but the Pine Tree Law hit them in their livelihood. The sawmills would have less business. Newcomers would have a harder time building their homes with only small trees available. Ebenezer Mudgett wouldn't have been able to sell his best timber to the shipbuilders. He still had his liquor business, but his instincts told him that more demands would be forthcoming that would eventually affect his children when they grew up. May the crown be damned! Ebenezer was determined to stop the confiscation of the trees. Alas, he had already been caught removing the King's Broad Arrow from the trees on his property, and some of the big trees he had already cut down. He gathered up the townsfolk, and they launched an attack. Sheriff Benjamin Whiting and his deputy John Quigley were caught unawares in Ware on the night of April 14, 1772. Ebenezer and the townsmen yanked them from their beds and proceeded to thrash them. And then they put them on their horses and sent them off backwards on their horses, sending the message, "Don't tread on me." Connie Evans penned that on September 8th in 1772, His Majesty's Superior Court was packed. Chief Justice Theodore Atkins asked Ebenezer, "How do ye plead?" Ebenezer answered, "Guilty, your honor." At that, the courtroom erupted in thunderous applause and cheers. The crowd was on Ebenezer's side. I believe the judge was too, for Ebenezer got off pretty easy. He had to pay a fine of 20 shillings plus the cost of the prosecution. The Pine Tree Riot is credited for having inspired the Boston Tea Party. Whenever I find myself in a historic building, I always look down at the floor to see if I can spot any of those wide boards that were supposed to be reserved for the king and were illegally installed, no doubt, in defiance of the Pine Tree Law. I haven't pondered a different take on the midnight ride of Paul Revere, but I do wonder if Ralph Waldo Emerson had lived in Concord, New Hampshire instead of Concord, Massachusetts. Would he have written the Concord Hymn about the thrashing felt around the world instead of a shot that was heard? I also wonder how the Pine Tree Riot would have been animated for Schoolhouse Rock. I imagine 20 cartoon townsmen chasing after the sheriff and his deputy with big sticks, but maybe leaving out the part where they got the snot beat out of them. In any event, the year 2026 indisputably marks the 250th anniversary of our country. But the when did the Revolutionary War start? I think, can be answered in where? The town where is on first. And a 46-year-old, not-so-famous merchant named Ebenezer Mudgett.